So yeah, welcome everyone to this speaker series event. My name is Linus Peterson, co-founder of the Swedish Longevity Cluster and host of this speaker series. I'm very happy and excited today to have Patrick Burgermeister joining us. I'll just say a few introductory remarks just about the cluster. So the Swedish Longevity Cluster is an organization with a goal of kickstarting the longevity industry here in the Nordic countries. We do this by having a lot of events, getting people together and explaining like what is longevity and what's the purpose, what's the goal, and how can we make this industry sort of happen here. And because this is our goal, I'm very happy with the guest today who has a lot of experience with this. And we kicked off the cluster in September last year, and we've had quite a run, I'd say. We have one major conference in January where we met Patrick. I'm very, very happy about that. That was awesome. We've been featured in a major newspaper here in Stockholm. We had 2 pitch nights, and of course we launched this speaker series. And as well, we've had another series of other events as well. So that's very great. And this speaker series has 2 goals. So the first major goal is to provide a common good for the global longevity community, so that anybody anywhere can take part of the knowledge and the wisdom of all the speakers. And we have CEOs, researchers, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders from all around the world really joining us. And this is wonderful. I mean, really, we're very happy to be able to give this knowledge to the world, basically. The second objective is to create a local longevity community here in Stockholm, where Per Söderström, our co-founder, and also Henrik Alén, another co-founder. So this is really great. And if you want to watch these events live with us, you have the opportunity to do so if you become what we call a longevity fellow. So you can meet up and you can mingle. You can meet other investors or stakeholders in various different kinds, founders, researchers, enthusiasts. So this is really great. If this is something that sounds appealing, please do reach out to me and we'll make it happen. We also have some announcements of future speakers. So April 9th, we have Mark Hämäläinen, my very good friend. I have to say right now, he stayed in my apartment a week after our conference here in January. And Mark is, besides my very good friend, also extremely knowledgeable when it comes to all things longevity. And he has recently published a report, or a roadmap, I should say, which actually sets out the first plan to solve aging, which I've ever seen written down. So I think it's very, at least in this format, I think it's very, very impressive. He has interviewed over 400 researchers in order to produce this. So he'll tell us all about that. On April 23rd, we have the world-renowned scientist Matt Chamberlain, very impressive. On May 9th, May 7th, we have Sara Hägg, one of the leading experts in the world of how we measure aging. And this talk will be live streamed from Karolinska Institute. We also have Emil Kendisora and Alexandra Stolzing joining us at later dates. All right. So today we have Patrick Burgermeister here. I'm so very happy about this. Patrick, you are the partner at Kizoo. I hope I say that correctly. You can correct me later. And you invest exclusively in rejuvenation biotech, which is very interesting. You're an entrepreneur and you want to understand the longevity space, and you have a great partner in the let's see here, Healthy Forever Foundation. Is that correct?
Forever Healthy, yeah, this way around.
Oh, thank you.
That's what we call our foundation site.
Oh, that's great. I think that's it. Is there anything in the introduction you would like to add on?
Well, as you mentioned, we got to know each other in Strängnäs during the LBF, the Longevity Biotech Fellowship camp. Was a great event, really like-minded people, and lots of them from all fields, from science, researchers, entrepreneurs, ethics, philosophy. Yeah, it was a splendid event, and I'm glad that you're having me tonight, and even changed the usual date from a Tuesday to a Monday, because I'm actually commuting from Switzerland, where I live, to southern Germany, and Tuesday is usually my travel day. So thank you for making this possible. I want to have this talk very interactive so that you can profit the most from it. So I show you very few slides that also contain a lot of potential discussion items. People who have listened to me before should also hear something new. So it's not just about how you finance longevity biotech startups and the basis for that, but also my personal journey. We have been asked several times during the LBF camp what we'd like to do, how you choose a career path, and mine started pretty early, and it was okay for me. There are lots of different paths that you can choose. I just wanted to share with you how I always tried to negotiate where I can have the biggest impact. When you're adolescent and have to choose then what you study, of course, yeah, molecular biology sounds like the right choice. I actually did this only in the second instance. I only became aware of this need, of this excitement also about molecular biology when I was already deep into business administration, so I started company first.
Molecular biology, I believe, which I studied as well, so I really like that.
Oh. So I studied twice and then tried to combine these two studies. And I became a biotech analyst at a Swiss bank, researching biotech and pharma companies. But then I realized after some years that science, when you work in a bank, is actually more of a public relations thing. Investors like to see that there's a scientist analyzing the shares that he recommends or for selling or buying. But in the end, you do not change anything. It's you could say, just a change of ownership that you cause if shares are traded. So what I then did is I went back to my field, to Novartis, and became a portfolio manager at this pharma company, where we analyzed all the development projects that are in the company, from preclinical stage all the way up to registration, with net present value calculations, etc., etc. And this was great. However, I also realized there that pharma companies, and this has not changed in the 20 years it's now, pharma companies always favor the low-hanging fruit. You can imagine if there are 10,000s of people working in the same company, everyone has a career path and will avoid some decisions that may be negative. So the more critical you are and the less innovation you promote, the less risk there is also for you personally. So I thought a large pharma company is probably not the place, back then at least, where you can promote longevity biotech the most. So I strove to become a venture capitalist, where I knew that I could finance early stage companies. Initially, I thought I will have to make a small detour and become a business developer, because that sounded like the perfect background for then investing into early stage companies. However, I told enough people, networking is always good, I told enough people that I want to become a VC, and then my phone rang and I learned of an open position. This is how I became a partner at the VC firm Biomed Invest in Switzerland, actually, and learned everything about venture capital. And part of that I'd like also to share with you today. And by the way, interrupt me anytime, not only if the connection is bad, but also if you have questions. I think that's very valuable and makes it more interactive. In total, I stayed 10 years there. First, I was an analyst, then I became a principal, then I became a partner, also risking my own money at the venture capital fund. I left almost to the month 5 years ago due to two reasons that are listed here. Geography. A lot of funds have a geographic restriction. So maybe they're able to invest in US only or a special field only. In my case, it was continental Europe, and even Scandinavia was excluded. So this was always a bit difficult. If you invest in biotech, you always do what is called a due diligence, so a thorough analysis of the company in terms of science, in terms of people, in terms of IP, etc. And when you do that, you do it globally to just know what will come to the market in a couple of years. And if you can only invest in a certain geography, you may have the opportunity to invest there, but in your due diligence, you realize that's only maybe the third best company out there in this special field that you're currently looking at. So geography was a hurdle. The focus, of course, was not longevity. That didn't exist back then, a decade ago. And yeah, so 5 years ago, I was able to join Kizoo. It's not a fund, as Linus mentioned before. And you asked me to correct whether you pronounce Kizoo correctly. It's like your name. Actually, it's Linus, but English people say Linus, and it's actually also Kizoo. But anyway.
Thank you.
Yeah, and with Kizoo, I think I found the perfect match in terms of focus and geography. Obviously, it's global. If you went to kizoo.com in preparation for this webinar, you may have seen or already known that most of our investee companies are actually in the US. This is typical in the biotech space. The sun rises first in the west, not in the east, as is physical the case. Also now, we've seen the first IPOs again happening in the US. So the environment is improving, but it first does in the US. What does Kizoo do? And I make just one slide here to tell you about the characteristics. Global in scope. We're based in Europe, but can invest anywhere. Evergreen structure. Maybe to those who are not familiar with this term, most of the investment vehicles of the institutional investors are so-called closed-end funds, meaning they have a closed time horizon. Usually it's 10 years for most funds that you can prolong slightly. Usually it's 1 or 2 years that you can prolong. These investors need to give back the money to their investors, which are called LPs or limited partners. So most closed-end funds must work towards an exit, meaning a change of ownership, so that they can get liquid again to repay their LPs. The opposite, and the more privileged position, if you will, is an evergreen structure, meaning you do not need to give the money back. You can reinvest it. A family office, as Kizoo is, briefly explaining that term, is managing the wealth of a family. That's where the term comes from. In our case, it's not a huge family, it's a single person in the end. As you may know, he's called Michael Greve and made his money in the IT space, in software, and also had this vehicle already before Kizoo, existed since 2008, but did IT investments. And then in 2016, he completely switched, and every new investment since then is in the longevity biotech space. What we'd like to finance is what we call category openers to enable completely new fields. I have listed a couple of our investments down here as examples. Reversal of atherosclerosis, and this word reversal is actually also very crucial for us. We do not just want to delay diseases. This brings me back to what I said about pharma companies picking the low-hanging fruit. It's enough to be economically successful if you delay death, to be blunt, in oncology, for example, by a couple of months. And if you look at the latest statistics, they're quite dire and depressing. Over the last decade, all the new cancer drugs that have been approved, you gained on average 3 to 4 months survival. That's enough for this industry to be profitable, highly profitable, that is. We have a much bolder approach with all its advantages and disadvantages. We will discuss this later on. So we always would like to see that there's somewhere in this mode of action, in how the drug works, the therapy, that there's a reversal aspect of it. Very clearly, it's also the case for cross-link breaking enzymes. The second example here, you may have heard of AGEs, advanced glycation end products. If you have a body like ours that lives for many decades, in the end, you always will have cross-links where there's no tool in your body, no enzyme that is foreseen to break this again. We all need glucose. You can starve yourself half to death, but you always produce glucose to live. You have oxygen that you breathe. So metabolism will create these crosslinks, whatever your lifestyle is. And we think, and I'm pretty sure that we invested in the very first company called Revel that does this. Next example would be the rejuvenation of the blood and immune system. We have invested into Mogling Bio, which rejuvenates hematopoietic stem cells by making their division asymmetry again. That's what is needed in stem cells. And yeah, that's another approach how to reverse aging.
Video.
Is there a question from someone? No? Okay. Otherwise I will continue. Good. Now, my talk is called Investing into Longevity. And I was thinking, what makes our field special? You can take one approach, one extreme approach, and claim we're doing exactly the same as every other investor, because there are no treatments for aging. It's not an accepted indication. There are no endpoints that are purely aging. And I heard that recently at a partnering conference where I met co-investors. They said, you're doing exactly the same, but you just have a special choice of indications. That may be the case. However, I think we always focus on the root causes of aging, which is not necessarily the case in the pharma business, in the normal life science investing field. They also invest into things that, are not really contributing to health span or lifespan. If you're losing your hair, maybe, or if you have a rash, a dermatologic indication, pigmentation disorder, etc. This would be things that Kizoo and other longevity investors would probably not touch.
How do you make the
I also
distinction?
Wait, say again?
How do you make the distinction? Now you sort of define, okay, this is longevity. How do you, by what criteria do you judge an investment?
I think it's all of these points here, and I will go through them one by one. I think it also has to have an impact on health span, right? I mean, you can always say, this patient has psychological problems because he's got a pigmentation disorder and is completely white, or I don't know, another color. I think this would be too far out for any longevity investor. Maybe the crucial point, since you asked, Linus, of this list here is the second one. Of course, you have to choose an indication that the FDA and the EMA and other regulatory authorities recognize as an approval indication. And usually you choose the easiest way to market for the first indication, meaning the one that has maybe less clinical trials that are needed, Maybe it's cheaper because the trials are smaller, etc. This is also done by big pharma, and then follows a larger indication. If you have proven the mode of action in a small indication, you then can expand to a larger indication. In our case, and in the case of longevity biotech, I think this larger market is actually everybody. Because we are all aging, we'd like to develop treatments that everybody can profit from after 60 years of age, 70, 80, etc., etc. A prime example would be, for example, sarcopenia. We all lose muscle mass towards the end of our life. If you're able to develop a drug, this is now hypothetical, Kizoo doesn't have anything like that in its portfolio, a drug against maybe Duchenne muscular dystrophy, a genetic disorder that affects mainly boys, and you can show that you are able to rebuild muscle, this would be something that everybody can use in the end to rebuild muscle and to have less frailty, and in the end also a longer health span. So this additional step towards the largest market of all, I think, is a key point. And briefly after that, I listed some discussion topics, and I already tell you now, maybe some people argue that we already have a huge longevity drug now on the market. You can criticize this or argue about in favor or against it, because the GLP-1 drugs that are out there against obesity and type 2 diabetes, they were actually developed for a clinical indication, but are now used all over the planet, even, may I say it, as a lifestyle drug. So maybe this is a role model, how we can go about it to attract the interest of the pharma companies. If we do something similar, we get approval in a clear clinical indication, life-threatening and all that. And then suddenly we have off-label use, as it's called, not the approved indication, but under the supervision of a physician and a consent of the patient. Everybody's then suddenly trying this or using it. Let's see, we can discuss this afterwards. The third point here is a little bit provocative, but I thought it's also special for longevity. Mostly it's enough if you have economical success. And there are lots of people out there who, yeah, have ideas, and sometimes they have scientific basis and merit, and sometimes they have less so. And what we try to finance is biotech companies that have teams that share our vision of really developing something for the market. You can also choose a different path, and I called it here getting rich quick, by hyping what you're doing, by striving for an exit early on. Maybe you sell your company already at preclinical stage or phase 1, and a bit afterwards, yeah, this thing implodes. However, the founders and maybe even the investors have made their money, and I have hardly ever seen, having worked since 2006 in venture capital, I've hardly ever seen an analysis how many of these so-called exits that everybody's praising and is striving for, how many of these exits have produced drugs that in the end help patients. You only ever see these big headline figures. XY Therapeutics has been sold for 400 million. And of course, they calculate everything in the milestones, in the potential payments that may come 5 or 10 years later, but sometimes don't. But you hardly ever see how much drugs a VC has produced, because frankly, it's not their business. They're just in the business to be economically successful in their 10-year fund and then to raise the next fund. Anyway, I'm rambling a bit. Here's a question mark also, need for evergreens. Some people have said, yeah, but it's difficult with a closed-end fund that only lasts 10 years to be in longevity biotech. I disagree. I think if you structure it intelligently and maybe choose orphan drugs that have a clear defined patient population, that have short readouts in clinical trials, I think you can do longevity as well as a closed-end fund. And we know some examples, for example, in Germany of Apollo Ventures, and Longevity is not a closed-end fund in this field. So I think it's really possible. There is an advantage, obviously, if you're evergreen, but it's not a prerequisite, if you ask me. What is unanswered is, will we see the same attrition rates? Attrition rates are the percentages of projects or drugs that fail in the end. An often used example is how many drugs make it to the market that enter into clinical trials. Clinical trials divided in phase 1, 2, and 3, depending on their size, can last around 8 to 12 years, depending on the indication, depending on the readout, etc. And the attrition rates are historically, there's pretty good data out there, that 1 out of 10 drugs makes it in the end to the market. This sounds horrible, and yes, we're still nowhere. We have a trial and error principle that governs still our drug discovery and development efforts. But one caveat I'd like to mention here that is seldom made: if you have tox issues, that's accepted. Of course, you stop your project. If you have lack of efficacy in humans, also accepted. And these are big reasons for the high attrition rates. What is seldom ever shown is if a pharma company deliberately stops a drug. And this is not that rare, actually. You know, they shuffle priorities, they shuffle management, etc. They have their economic calculations, and suddenly they say, oh, we think peak sales are only 175 million or something to that tune. And then they stop a drug, even though they may have been completely wrong in their estimation of peak sales potential. Or maybe they did it, can happen, I think, due to competitive reasons. I mean, what I can talk about is, because it's so long ago, Pfizer, about 12 years ago, bought a company called Hesperion that was developing a very promising cardiovascular drug. At the same time, however, Pfizer was also the maker and seller of atorvastatin, the biggest seller back then, 13 billion annually. Now you can, think maybe they stopped it not to cannibalize, as it's called, atorvastatin. You can design a clinical trial that is maybe not that perfect in its endpoint, its choice of readouts, etc., etc. So yeah, attrition rates are maybe too high as they are reported, but what will the attrition rates be in our field, in longevity biotech? We all know the higher the risk, the higher the reward. So maybe an initial guess would be we will see even worse attrition rates because we're shooting higher. We're not going for the low-hanging fruit. However, there's no data out there. So I think we needn't fear to have these moonshots that we sometimes try. I mean, if even one of them succeeds, it will be compensated by an extremely large market that will dwarf anything that we've seen until now.
A question, Patrick.
Sure.
So this is a very interesting discussion, and I have had this discussion with several people. Like the current pharma companies, some argue, would have an incentive to somehow stop the longevity drugs because they would make their current drugs sort of less valuable or not needed, basically. However, I have never seen a single example of this. Like, for example, if Pfizer, would buy up like a very promising longevity biotech and then basically shut it down in all but name, perhaps. Are you aware of any of these examples actually happening?
Not of a longevity biotech case. I know several cases for conventional drugs. You know, I know of another company that brought a cross-linking breaker in the eye for ophthalmic indications, and they also had ophthalmic drugs. But you know, it's always just a suspicion. You know, can you prove it in the end? It sometimes it really looks like, yeah, you killed something, even though it could have had promise. But it's hard to say.
Right. So perhaps not a major problem. Like the main problem is probably just lack of funding, I suppose, in the longevity field as a whole.
I think that's the bigger problem, yeah. And you know, if you develop a drug long enough, there's enough evidence to continue developing it. That's why I haven't mentioned this, but I can tell you, Kizoo keeps considerable reserves for every single key portfolio company that we have, just to make sure that we can finance the company. Sorry, there's an ambulance crossing here. Oops. Yeah. Yeah, stuff in the fire brigade. Yeah, we keep quite large reserves, so that the company will be close to the clinic, close to the market when an exit can be forced, you know, in the end. Good. Maybe the last point here is a kind of a thought experiment that I wanted to share with you, where I personally think, and Linus has asked me to look into the future also a bit, where I think the longevity biotech investing field could head. We started having therapies, mankind in general, with small molecules. We discovered them in plants, by chance sometimes, then we synthesized the first one, aspirin, etc., easy, very tiny entities, chemically speaking. And then came the antibodies, much larger in the 80s and 90s, first chimeric, then humanized until they were really usable as a therapy. And both classes, small molecules and antibodies, are single entities that you throw into a system, ingesting or injecting, of 23,000, give or take, genes. Us. A system that is highly evolved, is highly regulated, has a lot of redundancy, because organisms evolved to be resistant to changes in climate, etc., etc. So we are a system that is not easily perturbed. And now you expect a single molecule, you know, even the rapamycins and metformins, etc., out there, even if you hit the best point in your metabolism, that is a key regulator or whatnot. I personally, the longer I'm in this field, I think there's only so much you can expect. Maybe it's life prolonging, maybe it's promoting health, etc. But what we've seen to date is all much smaller than what you can achieve by not smoking, by having a healthy diet, by sleeping well, by meditating and eating well. So I think the potential of single molecules is limited in the end. We have evolved, however, in our therapeutic developments about 2011, if you take the CAR-T developments of University of Pennsylvania, to cellular therapies. Again, much bigger than antibodies. And now let me do the final step. If you continue this extrapolation, what would be the next logical step? Whole tissues. If we develop whole tissues as a therapy that is maybe autologous or genetically identical to your body, you would make a much bigger impact, I think, than a single molecule. And as a very nice side effect, you would also obviate all this research that is happening all over the planet. Most researchers that work in academic labs, they make a career by specializing on a single pathway, on a single molecule even. I used to be in Alzheimer research and focused on vascular deposits of A beta. With tissue engineering, you would obviate this academic drive to entrench yourself in decades long of publishing on a single molecule or pathway. I think we should move in that direction. We've discussed this internally at Kizoo, and I compiled a list of players in that field, and it's pretty short yet. But I think that's where the field is heading, should be heading. There are a couple of companies out there, but mostly they cultivate hepatocytes, so how do you say, liver cells, and sell them to pharma companies to improve their drug screening. However, some of these founders, they are aware that the potential out there is much bigger by then growing these things into small organs, organoids, or maybe in the end even whole ones, whole organs. So that's what is meant.
Patrick, is this connected to the whole idea of replacement? Mark Hammerlein
there. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah. If you then go to other organs and maybe even the brain in the end, and we've just discussed this in Strängnäs, yeah, this would be the replacement approach in the end. Good. Actually, to shock you, this is already the last slide. I just want to discuss with you. I want to get questions from you. So I made a couple of suggestions what we could talk about. The first one I already mentioned, the GLP-1 agonists that have created this huge hype about obesity treatments and losing weight without exercising. A question that I raised in Sweden during the camp is, where can we create our very first success case to convince all others, also the pharma companies, the big conventional venture capital funds, etc. If we do one longevity case, if we develop one treatment that is convincing, I think they will move into our field much quicker. They are already. I've had meetings with Novartis, with Eli Lilly, with Novo Nordisk, with Boehringer Ingelheim, even the family-owned traditional German pharma companies. They're coming into our field, but at a glacial speed. So where could our first success case come from? Tissue engineering, I spoke about. And two other ideas for discussion would be, what is a better exit? Is it selling your company as a whole, which is a success, yes, but may not lead to a treatment as we discussed, or bringing it public, IPO, make it tradable to everyone, which leaves you more control as a founder, but often is not accepted as an exit for investors because they cannot sell their shares immediately. Often there's something called lock-up period, where you're prohibited from selling your shares for 12 months or even longer. And very acute is the controversy, science versus hope. I didn't want to mention any names here, but I'm sure you, if you're on Twitter or LinkedIn or anywhere else, you will have seen the, and Matt Kaberlein is even one of your next speakers I saw.
Yeah, I'll ask him about this.
David Sinclair, etc. My personal view there is, yes, we should absolutely stay with the science. However, if you do it hardcore and do not accept anything that is not absolutely proven, even with long-term data, etc., we may be in a space where you have to admit, actually, we don't have anything. Go eat your greens and go jogging, summer and winter, etc. And I think if you take the opposite, the hardcore critics of David Sinclair, etc., warm results, C. elegans, molecular targets, and working on Drosophila is just not enough for the people. We need hope. And I don't mean it in a negative way, as something that will never materialize, but we need to balance hardcore science, but also be visionary about it and really look forward, not into the rear mirror, as often Europeans do, but maybe look ahead. What is the strength of a lot of Americans? Otherwise, we will not get the speed for the longevity field that it needs.
Well, this is great. Thank you so much, Patrick. Oh yeah, I want to open up. Barry, please go ahead.
Thank you, Patrick. I just wonder if I went to see Jamie, one of the directors of the X Prize Healthcare at Oxford University last week. And are you familiar with the X Prize for longevity?
Yeah, the one that is 1 million larger than all the others, so they could announce that it's the biggest ever.
Yeah, it's been exceeded since, actually, but they were for a while, yeah. But one of the things that came across, and I've been of the same mind of what you've just been explaining regarding going for an individual indication because aging is not recognised by the regulators. But what became clear from a number of people that attended was that the FDA and the EMA are listening now. And that, you know, with the X Prize, the target is you've got to solve cognition, muscle wastage, and immune function. All those three things.
Yep.
Not one of them. And the push is now to actually produce something that has an effect on all of those things. Now, whether that's a combination of drugs or whether it's a silver bullet, it happens to be what we're working on, all those three things. We work in the stem cell secretome area. But it was quite good to hear from them that those regulators are listening now. And I also think just listening to the fact that 200 companies around the world have registered with X Prize now, they will do a good job for us in terms of we're not a voice in the wilderness, if you like. There's a large group working there. So it was I was really pleased with what was going on last week, or what I was told about the X Prize.
I agree. So, there are clearly signs of them opening up the regulatory authorities. Also, the design for the ATTAIN trial in itself. Maybe we don't need that trial. Maybe we know what will be the outcome. But the fact that the FDA accepted the study design, you know, is a big move towards accepting aging in general as a clinical indication.
And if I can ask one more question, in terms of when you make an investment, what sort of size is your sweet spot?
Right. It's a couple of million initially. I'd say we're very flexible there. 500K, 1, 2, 3 million or so initially. It depends a lot on the stage of the company. As you can imagine, we need to go in very early at seed stage. And there was a phase, maybe until like 1 or 2 years ago, where the longevity biotech field experienced a hype. And there were preclinical companies out there that were able to demand valuations of 50, 70 million plus without having much data at all. This made us stay away from these companies. And so what I did is I went to research groups, to academic groups, scanning the literature and looking for projects that were not incorporated yet, just to get reasonable projects again. Meanwhile, the valuations have come down, and I think it's much healthier. If I can give an advice to entrepreneurs on the call, if it's much healthier if you don't maximize valuation right from the start. Try to build it up. You know, if markets are good and suddenly you can quadruple your valuation, don't do it, because times will change, and with the next round of investors, they will maybe give you a haircut, as we call it. So maybe you come down with your valuation again. If you build it up slowly and can show that you were always on the right track, you constantly increased your valuation, you created new data, I think it's much healthier. Some companies even fail. You know, if you have still strong founders that maybe even own the majority of a company after 1 or 2 financing rounds, maybe they're so keen on valuations that they stop the company, even though the drug may have potential. So that's another reason why maximizing valuations maybe not always, the best.
Wonderful. I have a lot of questions, but I want to open up to everybody else. So anyone else, just feel free to shout out. Just to connect. Where does our first success come from? So we had Aubrey on 2 weeks ago, and he's conducting this mice trial. And he said for a long time that if we can prove robust rejuvenation in mice, this would be sort of a turning point. And this would be the New York Times headline, if you will. That would sort of convince people. If we can take a mice and keep it young for a long time with a cocktail of drugs, this would be like a huge increase in funding. Do you agree with this idea, or do you think we would need to prove something in humans for this miracle moment to occur?
Actually, the latter. I'm not sure people will get excited about mice. And with reason, you know, the immune system is completely different. They die mostly of cancer. Rats die of other things, etc. I'm not sure whether this is really the breakthrough. I will put my money on humans.
Oh, I think so too, unfortunately. Adrian, please go ahead.
Can you tell us a few words about the downsides of the GLP-1 agonists?
I didn't say this, but maybe you guessed it. Kizoo stays away from obesity and type 2 diabetes field. And if I may make a short loop, actually that's a common theme at Kizoo. If a field is very well financed, for example, also reprogramming with Altos Labs and Retrobiotech, etc., we do not compete. We are not lemmings. We wish them luck, like we wish every group, and concentrate our funds on different fields. Medically, I'm not really into GLP-1 agonists. I haven't read a lot about it, but I think you need to keep taking them to sustain the weight loss that you have, which in itself sounds a bit like addiction. And I also hear that if you interrupt the treatment, which you may have to do sometimes, an infection or adverse effects, etc., I think you lost also muscle mass during taking the GLP-1 agonist. And that's the hardest thing to get back afterwards if you make a pause with the treatment. So I think it's a bit, two-edged sword.
Thank you.
So another question that you or another topic to sort of.
There's also one from Paul, I think.
Oh, please, Paul, go ahead. Perhaps I didn't see you there.
Is he in mute or? I can't hear anything.
No, I haven't muted anyone, I hope.
No. Well, Thomas has a question.
Yeah, now you're on.
Oh, yeah, good. Thank you. I was wondering about the attrition rate that you mentioned before for clinical trials. And how do you think we can get better knowledge about why clinical trials get ended? And could we like reshape institutions to get better information about it?
That's a huge task. Maybe also equally large, like confirming scientific data, you know, replicating scientific publications, because it's so seldom clear. Did the pharma company include enough patients for a readout? Maybe they haven't. Did they choose the right doses in the end? How many dose groups will you have? Did they choose the right endpoints? Inclusion, exclusion criteria are a topic. There are many, many things that only a handful of people in any given indication can really judge. And then there are always arguments why they did it all the same. Maybe they excluded the highest dose, which would have been efficacious because of cost reasons. Or maybe they can say, you know, we saw an effect in rats at that dose, so we thought we'd exclude that. There's always arguments here and there. There's nothing that you really can do about this, I guess, except creating a drug that is without any doubt efficacious and makes people healthier and live longer. Then I think you can't hide it. Yeah.
If you were to give advice to investors that are not currently into longevity biotech specifically, but sort of more in life science in general, would you have any specific advice then?
Yeah, well, networking is extremely important. If you're an isolated angel that has the ability to invest a couple of million, etc., don't do it in isolation. Meet the people. Go, for example, the Leaf Network has a very nice circle of investors called the Leaf Investor Network. Familiarize yourself with the topic before you do the first investment. Learn about due diligence, and maybe pay a little bit to a science guy, an academic guy, maybe a patent lawyer, etc., just to be sure that your bets are well placed. And be aware of the attrition rates that I mentioned earlier. And maybe one other remark. I was on the board of a business angel club for more than 10 years. And I've seen a lot of angels, people who you would consider wealthy. They started with enthusiasm investing into that field and didn't pay attention to the reserves that you need. So after 2 or 3 investments, they were suddenly asked for the next round in the same company. And they realized, oh gosh, I mean, I already have $1 million in there. And then they asked for 2 million because the rounds have gotten larger and they're approaching clinical trials. And what happened is that this business angel club suddenly had not many new members, let's put it like that, because the existing ones realized that they can't do more, no new investments. So you need to have really a long breath and deep pockets.
Patrick, you put your LinkedIn address, but unfortunately, when you try and connect to you, you've got to put your email address in as well. Are you going to give us your email address?
I need to approve the people, otherwise anyone could. Yeah, there's a small filter in there.
Okay. So how do we get approved then? Because obviously I'd like to connect with you.
Yeah, I will send it back, and then you can accept it. Because I don't want to. You need my email address, and I say it publicly now, and this talk is published on YouTube. Then yeah.
Ah, right. Okay. But I can't connect. Sorry, how can you do it back?
I see who contacted me, and I will get back to you. Right. So I see Barry tried to is inviting you on LinkedIn, etc. I will get an email.
Okay.
That's great. Love the connections made. We only have a few minutes left, and I have so many questions. I could talk to you forever, Patrick. So the label expansion approach that the field currently have, could you sort of paint a picture of this super success story that we actually do? We have the potential, you know, if we actually have a drug that for real, you know, extends health span for a significant amount of time. you know, that would be worth, you know, everybody would want it. It's like 8 billion people. So it's like, you know, biggest company by night, basically. But like, how do we get there when we have this label expansion approach and the FDA have this list of diseases and you have to pick one and then you have to do the next one and you sort of have to, it's very cumbersome. So like, how do we,
how do we go about it? Yeah. I made the example about sarcopenia, about muscle loss. I can give you another one. Let's take neurodegeneration. I think some philosophers have even made that. What if a drug would suddenly make someone more intelligent? Would you forbid it to the general public? Let's say there's a company out there who has a very general mode of action against neurodegeneration, and they choose frontotemporal dementia, or another rare disease that is not that common as Alzheimer's, for example, or even Parkinson's. So a limited indication that is not that difficult to develop, and then it gets approved and has 0 side effects. I'm fantasizing here a little bit. And due to the mode of action, people would suddenly realize that even healthy people develop this kind of maybe dementia because, we all get it when we're older. And this would then lead to a market where everybody would want this. So in the end, you would have a public pull that they say, we require this, it's our right, etc., etc. This could be another hypothetical case of a longevity drug that has been developed in a conventional indication.
Very interesting. Very interesting. I see. I know you have a hard cutoff here at at 7.
Yeah, it can be a few minutes later, I guess. It's
That was great. I want to touch on the whole replacement paradigm that Mark Hammerlein and Nathan are pushing. You sort of alluded to. I like the whole sort of scale thing. You know, where you begin at a small molecule and you move up the ladder, so to speak. So this is really cool. But do you see like any intermediate steps where you actually sort of change or just add some tissue, I suppose? You know, replace some kidney tissue or something, and then you can have sort of like steps along the way before we get to the to the more extreme version of a replacement.
Yeah, I think the logical way would be rank the organs according to vascularization, because that's one of the toughest problems. You can already buy a new nose, to be a bit funny here, you know. Whatever is not vascularized, cartilage, or also ears. We've seen publications where they grow an ear even on the back of a mouse or so. If you then go to organs that are more vascularized, it gets more difficult. And the most difficult organ, of course, is the brain, because it's your skull and you cannot replace it. Maybe very, very slowly take out diseased tissue and replace it, etc. But I think the stepping stones, and I think that's your question, how to get there, will be moved from one organ to the other.
Very cool.
And
very
you know, we already have tissue engineered bladders out there. You know, if you look at Anthony Attala from Wake Forest Regenerative Medicine Institute, they implant them. They function very well, but it's only 2 layers of muscle. You know, so it's quite an easy organ. The kidney is already much more difficult with the glomerules, etc., the blood filtration. Maybe next is the heart. Who knows? I mean, it's just a pump in the end, right? Maybe it's even a mechanical solution, like the Carmat company in France.
Very interesting. Okay, so last question from my side. We had during the retreat, we had a discussion, which I think Nathan formulates this very well, Nathan Shen. He sort of pushed the point that when you invest, it really depends what your goal is. So he made a distinction of maximalists and health span. So a maximalist would be someone who strives to extend the maximum lifespan of humans. So, 120 plus, that's the goal. Versus the more conventional and perhaps, more moderate health span, you want to extend the healthy part of life, up until the 80s and 90s perhaps, and that's considered a success. So do you and your family office, do you have a sort of take on this, or do you have any opinions on this matter?
Well, having worked in big pharma, I think we need intermediate successes. And I don't think the drugs that extend your life to 150 years or something are even in the making. So I think, the first ones that will be successful are actually the health span extending therapies.
Mm-hmm. And do you think, I mean, you're most likely right on this, but it matters what your sort of end goal is. It sort of matters, like the path is different there. Some people argue that health span and the maximalist position, it's basically the same thing. You'd make the same investments. But I heard Nathan and some other folks argue differently. So I'm trying to, like, is this the case? Yeah.
Yeah. But usually if new things are developed, you have the non-profit angle first. Technologies are first developed at universities, at academia. And only if they have a certain maturity, ripeness, so to say, become they really investable. So I would expect that these two categories that you mentioned, they will move one after the other, not at the same time, towards this funnel,
Mm-hmm.
So first we'll see maybe a health span extending therapies in academia. Then they will move into the investment field, where people also can expect to get a return. And maybe the maximalist therapies come after that. I don't think that they will appear at the same time.
Cool. Very, very good take. Like it. All right, we're gonna wrap up. If anyone has a last question, please shout out. Otherwise, thank you so much, Patrick. I really enjoyed the discussion, and thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Yeah. I have a last remark. If you want to speak again or see exciting companies, we have our annual Rejuvenation Startup Summit on 10th and 11th of May. And it's in Berlin, in a very beautiful spot, directly at the Spree, the river there. And we still have tickets.
Good.
That's great. We know where we're going to be in May. I love it.
Excellent.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. This concludes today's event. And thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye. Cheers.
Bye.